This is ContactTalkRadio.com, consciousness in action, and you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the book.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI Horn Hasan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on April 15th, 2021 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. So first, I just want to apologize for anyone who was listening live today because we had some technical glitches with the recording, and I'm actually re-recording the show now. So if there's a delay in your ability to get it, my apologies. Second, my usual housekeeping stuff. Please note that you can check out my Karmic Evolution Facebook page posts on the current astro energies happening each week, along with my new and full moon posts. Now, I have been rather negligent over the past month or so I apologize for that, but the technical problems for this show were not related to me, thank God, but I've had other technological issues, which I think I explained last week on the show, so my apologies for that. But things should be back to normal soon enough. The week ahead, the Astro News you can use is usually posted by Monday or Tuesday every week and covers the Astro energies through the following weekend or the beginning of the next calendar week. Now, also on my Facebook page, you can sign up for and receive my new and full moon reports via my Conversations About Consciousness email newsletter. Just go to the left-hand side of the Karmic Evolution Facebook page, scroll down till you hit Join Email List, and as my dad used to say, it's as simple as that. And if you've missed any shows or you want to re-listen to an old one or a specific one, just go to my website at karmicevolution.com, which is also where you can access this show live, and hit Radio Show on the upper right-hand corner of the banner. And it's there that you can access the older recordings of all my past shows. So in addition, I just want to reiterate that I'm continuing to offer my discounted 1-hour Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for listeners for only $99. Many of us are struggling now still with issues around confinement, stuckness, choices related to relationships, careers, finances, health, etc. If you desire to know how and why some of these energies now may present karmic echoes of the past that hold you back, and how to better understand with conscious clarity what your true soul is trying to communicate so that you can grow in consciousness toward a more satisfying and happier future, a reading of this sort can help unlock answers to these things. So if you want to gain greater consciousness about your soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, if you'd like to move from chaos to clarity in areas concerning your relationships, your career, your finances, your health, or heal old karmic wounds and co-create your own future happiness and success, if you desire to awaken to your true potential and highest destiny in this lifetime, then please, by all means, take advantage of my special discounted offer for listeners. Again, a 1-hour Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $99. Simply email me at SHERI, that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com, and we'll get your reading booked today. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. Okay, so let's get to this week's Astro news you can use. We experienced the last new moon, the Aries New Moon, on April 11th, which calls us now during the currently waxing portion of this monthly lunar cycle to trust our instinct to initiate. What we initiate doesn't really matter. The point is to not allow ourselves to stifle something that arises from our unconscious, something that cannot be denied, and something that eventually needs to be birthed or given life. Now, I wrote in my Aries New Moon post and newsletter that Mars-ruled Aries energy, the archetype, is about taking action based on our intuitive instincts. For example, I said that a baby in utero doesn't really think about if, when, and how she will signal to her mom that it's time to be born. She just knows when the time is right. There really is no rational explanation for it when you think about it. So, and this is an example I often use because it's the visual that comes into my head repeatedly. Just as a Native American in the middle of the woods, alone, hears the rustle of an animal behind him, it's his instincts that tell him whether that animal is large or small, predator or harmless, and then he acts accordingly. Now, that doesn't mean that when we act on instinct, we might not do the wrong thing sometimes. However, the point here is that Mars-ruled Aries archetypal energy is about taking the initiative based on our instincts without engaging in a deeply thought-out rational explanation of why. So in short, Aries is an energy that doesn't think. It simply acts. For those of you who are familiar with Stephen Forrest, with whom I studied, this kind of brings to mind for me, I'm always playing like devil's advocate, there are times karmically when we might have acted quickly without thinking, but the results might have harmed us in some way. So an example that he uses is, say that you see someone getting attacked and you step in without thinking about it. It's just instinctive. You step in and defend them. But in the process, maybe you kill the perpetrator, right? A fight with a knife and you land on top of him and the knife goes into his gut or his heart or something. So this discussion really isn't about that, but I just want to bring that up because, it's not always that when we act on instinct, things can turn out to be wonderful. But the point is that the Aries New Moon is telling us that we can't deny the instinct. I also thought of the example, for those of you who remember, there was a political, I don't remember the organization, but they hosted Kamala Harris when she was running for president at that time, I think. And she was on stage and somebody jumped up, or somebody jumped on the stage in a menacing way. And the woman who was talking to her, and again, I forgot her first name. Her second name is Jean-Pierre. She jumped up, she leaped up clearly without thinking and put her body in front of Kamala Harris, who was sitting in the chair next to her, to protect her. Right? So Mars Aries' highest mission is to defend and protect, whether it's ourselves or others. And so obviously if the person had meant to attack Kamala Harris, he might have attacked this woman instead. And she didn't think about it. She just acted out of instinct. So that's the kind of energy that Aries, at this Aries New Moon, is asking us to plant seeds around. So it's asking us to say, what is it you want to initiate through your instinct? And this Aries New Moon was aided through several waxing, easy trine and sextile aspects. And you can read more detail about, how my analysis of the Aries New Moon looks on my Karmic Evolution Facebook page, or you can send me an email at the address I mentioned above, and I'll forward to you a copy of my newsletter, and put you on the email list if that's what you like. So now this energy included the Sun sextile to Mars on April 13th, and to Jupiter, the Sun's sextile to Jupiter today on April 15th. But the thing is that this lunation also contained a few challenging aspects. one of which is still in play now until it perfects tomorrow on April 16th. So Venus, the Moon, and the Sun all were in Aries and waxing into squares to Pluto in Capricorn at the Aries New Moon on April 11th. And these cardinal squares tell us that action may become even more necessary during the waxing portion of this monthly lunation cycle, but that such action can be tempered by gaining a greater understanding of ourselves as we strive for personal evolutionary growth and consciousness now. So Venus and the Moon squaring Pluto, which happened, the first one just after the exact lunation on April 11th and the second the next day, has to do with conflicts or struggles with others, particularly females, family members, that's the Moon, or others with whom we are in relationship, that's Venus, who try to manipulate, coerce, or control us, and particularly through our relationships that deal with money or finances, because Venus often represents money. Now, an interesting aside is that my son, my SON, confided to me the day after the new moon hit that he and his father got into an argument that night of the new moon, which occurred here around 10:30 p.m. Eastern time. And apparently his father was trying to bully him about some financial stuff, the details of which, of course, I won't go into, but suffice it to say it resulted in an argument. Now, they did resolve their conflict shortly after, as the sun was waxing towards its sextile to Mars on April 13th, or, they resolved it, I think, the next day or that night, like 24 hours later, but not before they had a bit of a blow-up first, which in turn led to their coming to better terms with each other over the issue at hand. So we know from these kinds of experiences that, sometimes having a blowout with someone is not a bad thing because it clears the air, clears the tension, brings things to a height, and then we can, afterwards, when we all calm down, we can talk about them exactly that, calmly. Now, however, as the Aries Sun doesn't perfect its square to Pluto until tomorrow, April 16th, we know this energy has been in play most of this week, especially since the lunation a few days ago. So if we simply look at the news that's emerged over this past week, we can see some pretty clear indications that this cardinal square, which perfects tomorrow, represents conflicts with authority figures that are continuing to play out right now as we speak. The sun in mundane astrology represents kings or leaders, such as presidents, prime ministers, etc., and Pluto represents several things: wealth, joint resources, sexuality, deep loyalty and bonding, atomic and nuclear energy or power, and transformation, of course, of which the ultimate transformation is death. So what have we seen this past week in the news? First, the death of Prince Philip, the 100-year-old husband of Queen Elizabeth of England. He was the man who would never become king, but also never had a particularly warm relationship with his own son, Prince Charles, and was likely somewhat responsible. Again, I'm not an Anglophile. I don't follow this stuff all the time, but I know a little bit. And I think I remember seeing that he was responsible, at least in part, for advising his wife to stay on the throne at this latter age that she's achieved, because she's now in her 90s, rather than to vacate it and give Prince Charles the opportunity to reign. He was also a man of not only royalty, he was born into Greek and I think it was Danish, I know it was Scandinavian royalty, but also of wealth. And much of his wealth, of course, came ultimately from the British government and its people's sustaining of the monarchy. Secondly, the death of Bernie Madoff, the infamous Ponzi scheme guy, who the press actually labeled the Ponzi scheme king, passed away. We learned of his death because he passed away in jail, where he's actually been since 2009, on April 13th. Now, Madoff screwed with other people's money by cheating them through an elaborate securities scam. Pluto's joint resources, remember? It's also trust. So people put their trust in him to invest their money, and as I said, he screwed them, which is obviously slang, a sexual slang. So just another little plutonic remark. Also, during this past week, recently, we saw the Israeli bombing of the nuclear facility in Iran, presumably to slow down their capability to develop nuclear weapons. And Pluto, as I mentioned, is also associated with atomic and nuclear power. Pluto was discovered in 1930, which heralded the actual development of the atomic bomb several years later. And the Israeli bombing occurred just as ongoing discussions between U.S. European allies and Iran had begun around the allowance of the U.S. to re-enter the JCPOA, which is the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which was the agreement from which former President Trump removed America from in May of 2018. But the whole agreement between the U.S. and European allies and Iran was for the purpose of slowing Iranian capability to actually achieve nuclear status in the world. In addition, today and there's the implication, as I said, that the Israel's actions were actually attributed to attempting to deter Iran from achieving this goal, but also to sour Iran on going back to the negotiation table with the European allies on behalf of the U.S., and that's been in play for the last 2 weeks or so. In addition, today the U.S. announced sanctions on Russia in retaliation for its cyber hacking. Remember, Sun, king, president, prime minister, dictator, autocrat, take your choice. The U.S. announced sanctions on Russia in retaliation for its cyber hacking recently, over the last year, placing bounties on the heads of our soldiers in the Middle East, and its recent aggressive stationing of more additional troops on the border of the Ukraine, and presumably for other things as well. And finally, just as an aside, just before showtime, I saw an article from NPR with this headline, and scientists create early embryos that are part human, part monkey. And the beginning of the article reads in part, and I quote, "An international team has put human cells into monkey embryos in hopes of finding new ways to produce organs for transplantation. But some ethicists still worry about how such research could go wrong." Well, talk about evolution. Oh my God. Whoa. This is I share the ethicist's concern about this going wrong, but still, it is a topic that pushes us forward through into evolutionary progress. In a sense, it's like saying there's no stopping science. But in any case, these events and reports are all signals and signs from the collective that, as per the waxing Aries New Moon energy, movement forward in our individual lives will not occur without some resistance or outright confrontation, be it from external others or from our internal selves. So it behooves us all to examine now whether resistance to any future plans we may have, particularly if they involve money, business, and power, Pluto's in Capricorn after all, stems from within or without, and further to discern whether external resistance really simply mirrors our own internal self-sabotaging fears, mirrored back to us by bringing our desired achievements into fruition, our desired soul growth. So this is the inner evolutionary soul growth we're all asked to confront right now. And in doing so, we're further alerted that it may not end well if we deny our actual instincts to initiate now. After all, it's kind of like if the baby decides not to pay attention to her instincts in utero and stays in the womb forever, this is going to have a very bad outcome for all involved. So I think you get what I'm saying. So if we do decide to put off acting on our instincts to initiate something now, and I'll mention here that, of course, the sun, which takes approximately 1 year to spin its way through the zodiac, squares Pluto roughly twice annually. So this is not actually an infrequent transit. It would happen once every 6 months or so. You have a Sun conjunct Pluto that starts the cycle, Sun in a waxing square, Sun in opposition, Sun in a waning square. And that is, if we don't confront it now, this cycle, this year's cycle, we'll only have to reconfront it later on, right? So given that this is not an infrequent aspect, Sun square Pluto, we can recognize that faster moving planets like the Sun and the Moon and Mercury and Venus are triggers to slower evolutionary growth that's shown by other transits and progressions to and in our charts. So every 6 months or so, the Sun is going to square Pluto, depending on Pluto's movement, how far he's moving at that time, because he has an elliptical orbit. And it challenges us to take small steps towards our inner evolutionary growth. So if we don't adhere to or recognize that now, we're just going to have to be challenged again at a later date. And perhaps again and again and again, depending on whether or not we begin to become more conscious of from where our resistance actually stems. So why not start to make that evolutionary progress now and pursue it into the future? I mean, Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say, and gaining a strong sense of internal empowerment represents a slow evolutionary process, like I said. But the process can be engaged in consciously if we so choose. And that's what a large part of this Aries New Moon energy with its squares to Pluto is about. We can start by recognizing that anyone who tries to control, coerce, or manipulate us is actually mirroring back to us our own hidden shadow energies. That's the story I just told my son. That's a classic father-son story, right? Confrontation. Now, I mentioned shadow energies, and shadows aren't bad per se. Rather, they simply represent repressed energies that we buried long ago in our psyches so as not to have to look at or deal with them because they're either painful, too horrifying to acknowledge, or somehow otherwise reprehensible to us. And why? Well, because these things are ugly, they're frightening, or simply downright disgusting sometimes. Our shadows come in all sizes, shapes, and forms, but the point is they represent the land of experiences from both earlier this lifetime and past life karma that we want to neither acknowledge nor admit to or deal with. So the psyche represses them. And when we do this, where does the shadow energy go? Energy doesn't die. If we believe in reincarnation, that's one of the reasons why. It's the science that can actually lead us to believe in reincarnation, right? So if the soul contains energy and the energy of the physical body dies, what happens to the energy of the soul? It's why we might believe that the energy of the soul reincarnates into a fresh physical body. But in this lifetime, when we repress the shadow energy, it remains hidden from consciousness, which is precisely why we label it a shadow. However, the shadow reveals itself when it's so deeply buried within that the only way it can make itself known is when it comes at us through another person or circumstance. What we often fail to realize, however, is that it's our own inner energies that we project out into the world and manifest the world around, meaning the people and the circumstances in the world, and they, in turn, often reflect back to us our own hidden shadow parts. Again, there's nothing bad about this. It is what it is, as they say, but we can become aware, and in doing so, withdraw these energies by integrating them into the conscious portion of our psyches. And when we do that, the problem, the conflict, the confrontation, etc., starts to go away. And in turn, now, moving forward, we can draw to us instead people and circumstances who reflect a truer version of who we really are deep down underneath it all. So let's note too now that Venus moved into her own sign of beauty and pleasure-loving Taurus yesterday on April 14th. As we deal with confrontations, including the residue from Venus's square to, and the moon square to Pluto on April 11th and 12th, and in the context of the sun still squaring Pluto up until tomorrow, we notice that Venus begins to mark the shift towards Taurus energy for this coming month. First, however, Mercury sextiles both Jupiter and Mars on April 17th, which, because it's followed by Mercury square to Pluto that day too, may allow us to apply laser-like mental focus to transcend our mundane worries and view the larger picture, as well as to engage in animated but open-minded discussions or debates now. Now, the thing is that the Sun, Mercury, and Venus are never too far away from each other. So you'll note that first, on the evening of the Aries New Moon, Venus squared Pluto, and then the moon followed. The moon moves real fast, so we're not even going to really talk about her. But then, so Venus squared Pluto, and then the sun squares Pluto tomorrow, and the following day, Mercury squares Pluto as well. So you can see this happens all the time in these cycles where the one follows the other follows the other. Mercury is never more than 28 degrees away from the sun in the sky at any given moment, and Venus is never more than 45 degrees away from the sun in the sky at any given moment. So they follow each other. They play tag with each other. So you'll see over and over again when one makes an aspect to a planet, then the next one does, then the next one does. The order that they do it in depends on whether Mercury is the sign before, the sign of, or the sign after the sun. And likewise with Venus, only she's got 5 signs that she has to be within or of the sun in its sign at that given time. So we can, along with this Mercury square Pluto, which is actually an obsessive kind of energy, we can choose to obsess, or we can throw ourselves deeply into studying something or reviewing something or learning something or whatever. So it's not only a negative thing, but again, in the context of soul growth, evolutionary soul growth, we're going to use our minds and our intellects. So we might find ourselves between now and April 17th having more conversations, picking other people's brains for good ideas or sharing our ideas with them and expressing ourselves more, all with the sharpness of mind that allows us to incorporate what we learn about ourselves through these conversations or these studies or these interactions into greater consciousness now. So a perfect question upon which to meditate now is, what do we have that no one can take away? If we challenge ourselves between now and late April 17th or early April 18th, when Mars quincunxes Pluto, we may find that answers arrive, cluing us into where we are strongest in this knowledge and where we may need to develop greater insight. This is especially true as the sun waxes toward a conjunction to Mercury in Aries on April 18th as well, later that day. So altogether, this tells me that if we can consciously acknowledge and accept what we're learning about ourselves, particularly through conflicts with others, we can learn to develop the courage to face our innermost fears, because it's our innermost fears that are coming back at us from the other. Now, Mercury square to Pluto can also reveal to us whether what we think is true is actually objectively and factually true. And, I'll allude here to being disabused of the notion that certain conspiracy theories are actually factually true. And I'll leave it at that. But that's just another side effect. Venus into Taurus is going to be followed by Mercury and the sun's entrance into Taurus on April 19th, providing us a trio that's hopefully focused on promoting peace rather than war. And that would essentially bode well for things like the Iranian-European talks about allowing the U.S. to re-enter to the JCPOA, and also Iranian restraint in response to the Israelis' recent attacks on their nuclear plants. And I feel like this the sun, the Venus, the sun, and the Mercury together in Taurus is like this happy little band of, I say this because I'm a Taurus sun, so I don't mean any disrespect to anyone else, but this happy little band of piggies playing a flute and dancing and singing their way, into the Taurus month, and leading the gang, that kind of thing. So we also will experience the first quarter lunar cycle and monthly lunar cycle on April 19th, later that day or early on the 20th, when the Leo moon squares the Taurus sun. Now, this is a fixed square that can reflect one of two things, in my mind anyway: an intransigence to compromise or negotiation in the name of peace, or the ability to push through being stuck on one's own level of importance, the Leo moon, in order to achieve greater harmony and something of value down the line, Taurus sun. So Taurus energy is about learning what pleases our senses and then determining what we value based on this. It's the five senses, that of taste, touch, smell, hearing, and sight. It's physical in nature, so the shift toward Taurian energy beginning next week brings us all the opportunity to go deep about what it is that we truly value, especially now as some of the world begins to open up again due to, COVID-19 vaccination solutions. I'd mention, too, that the recent news about Johnson & Johnson's vaccine suspension also resonates as part of the Sun square Pluto, a monkey wrench, if you will, a complication thrown into the evolutionary progress previously hailed as revolutionary. We all know, I think, especially those of us who are not real big fans of former President Trump, that one of the things he did manage to do is put into motion the warp speed program, which was, to speed up the progression of eventual vaccines that would actually be able to be put in people's arms and start to prevent death from an extreme version of the virus. So, we may all have different ideas about what we think of the actual vaccines, but my point is that there's been a monkey wrench thrown into that, but not with all of them, just with the Johnson & Johnson, and in Europe, the European-approved AstraZeneca. However, going back to the energy moving into Taurus, as we morph into this energy this month, and we can bear in mind that Uranus in Taurus has already been asking us to change or adjust our value system to be more in line with the changing times. We can use this greater Taurus energy to both ground what it is we instinctively want or desire to initiate now and going forward, and also to plan, which is another Taurian trait, slow and steady, cautious, to plan for its eventual physical manifestation, assuming physical manifestation applies to our particular plan. Now, I want to go into a discussion of somebody's chart right now, too, and spend the rest of the time talking about him because he's so much in the news now, because he's a Taurus sun, and because I thought it would be interesting to look at the natal energies of Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz. Unfortunately, though relatively young, I think he's 38 years old. I don't know if he's going to be 39. What was his 82? So yeah, he'll be 39, I guess, this year in May. So unfortunately, even though he's young, we don't have a birth time for him. But we can still decipher through his planetary aspects some of his major evolutionary energy. So again, I thought I'd discuss his chart for a few. So Matthew Gaetz II was born on May 7th, 1982 in Hollywood, Florida, to his mother, Victoria Quartermos. I'm not sure how I pronounce that, but it's Quertermous. I don't know if that's a French name. And Don Gaetz, who later became a prominent local politician. According to Wikipedia, Gaetz grew up near Fort Walton Beach, Florida, and graduated from Niceville High School, which is kind of ironic, in the year 2000. He also graduated from Florida State University in 2003 with a Bachelor of Science in Interdisciplinary Sciences and then earned a Juris Doctor, or a law degree, from the William and Mary Law School in 2007. And Gates was admitted to the Florida bar in 2008. Now, Gates' father, which is kind of interesting, was a local politician who represented parts of Northwest Florida as a member of the Florida State Senate from 2006 to 2016, and was also Senate President from or State Senate President from 2012 to 2014. And Gates' grandfather, Stanley Jerome Gates, was the mayor of Rugby, North Dakota, and a candidate for lieutenant governor in North Dakota in the 1964 North Dakota Republican Party State Convention, which, again, ironically, is where the poor man died of a heart attack. Now, Gates is named for his great-grandfather, Matthias Lewis Gates, and is a descendant of Philip Getz. And I don't know if this is a typo in Wikipedia, but Gates' name is spelled Gaetz, but this says he's a descendant of Philip Getz, Goetz, who arrived from Germany to Minnesota after 1838. Now, Gates has described himself or self-identifies as a libertarian populist, and he's also been described as a nationalist. So I ran his chart in Placidus for noon, because when we don't know the time, we can at least put the moon close to the midheaven. Put the sun close to the midheaven, and try to pin down the moon. That's the first thing you do when you don't know a person's time within a 24-hour time period. But we can immediately see that he's a Taurus sun conjunct Chiron, and that his moon in Scorpio opposes both of them. Now, that appears to be the case, right? But first, let me delve into the fact that he's a Taurus sun, which is normally a touchy-feely type, right? We like to snuggle and hug and, feel, whatever, touchy-feely, we derive pleasure through our senses, right? But when the sun is conjunct Chiron and Chiron's in Taurus, that's a wound to what gives us pleasure, all right? Chiron conjunct the sun is a wound related to the father. But Chiron in Taurus is a wound related to how we view our own sense of value, particularly through the physical body and the five senses. All right. Now, since he has a Scorpio moon, we know that he derives security, potentially, one of the ways, okay, is through sex or sexuality. But the moon comes out at 12 degrees and 39 minutes at noon on the date of his birth, May 7th, 1982, and the sun in 16 degrees Taurus, 45 minutes. So at 12:39, the moon definitely opposes the sun. But because it's noon and we don't know his exact time, we do know that the moon moves approximately 1 degree every 2 hours. So if it's noon and we roll the clock back 12 hours, we know that the moon started 6 degrees before and will end the day at 11:59 p.m., 6 degrees ahead. So 6 degrees before is approximately, because it's 12:39, approximately 6:39. And if we roll it ahead, it's approximately 18:39. Either way, however, psychological astrology and astrologers such as myself use very wide orbs, particularly in relationship to the luminaries. So no matter how you slice it, the moon, in my opinion, is opposite the sun. And the sun is attached to Chiron, so he kind of comes along for the ride, whether the moon technically technically opposes Chiron to the degree within a particular orb or not. Again, psychological astrology uses even more than 10 degrees of orb, but I always say if it's in the life, it has to be in the chart. Just a matter of finding it. Okay, secondarily, if the moon is, again, using a wide orb, 13, 14, Scorpio, Gates has Jupiter at almost 4 degrees of Scorpio. He's got a 3-degree 59-minute, might have moved the minute in the 24-hour period, I'm not sure. However, I believe that probably he has a moon conjunct Jupiter in Scorpio, and that they may, because if the moon is close to Jupiter and the moon opposes the sun, just like it brings in an opposition to Chiron, though not literally, brings in the energy, so does it bring in the energy of a moon Jupiter. So we have a moon opposite sun for sure, and the high potential for a moon Jupiter. Now, again, Taurus, sun is interested in physical pleasure, but conjunct Chiron, there's a wound to perhaps receiving that pleasure, or also very strongly to perceiving oneself as desirable. And that's an irony if one's emotional security is based at least on part, because Scorpio represents other things as well, loyalty, joint finance, financial resources, etc., as I said, and sexuality. If one derives one's sense of pleasure through the sexual act, but one does not feel, quote unquote, worthy of attracting people to him, then he may, first of all, if he's got a moon Jupiter, I don't want to confuse you guys. So sun opposite moon is a disconnect between the heart and the mind. Sun Chiron is a wound to one's own sense of self-value, including in particular in Taurus to one's own physical body and how one may attract others to him. And the moon in Scorpio is, I won't say obsessed, but is concerned very much with sexual matters. And if it's conjunct Jupiter, that's expanded. So expanded sexual, we can see a recipe for a person who needs to have a lot of sex in order to reinforce for himself that he's physically pleasing, desirable, or beautiful. Because deep down inside, he doesn't believe that. Okay? Now, on top of that, we've got the fact that he is a Venus in Aries opposite, and again, we don't know house placements, we don't know ascendant, so none of that is really particularly relevant to what I'm talking about, but I'm trying to point out that we don't even really need it. It will enhance the interpretation even more, but we don't really fully need it. So Venus is in Aries, and it's opposite Mars, which is in Libra. So each planet is in its opposite sign, right? In traditional astrology, it's either in fall or detriment. I always forget which, but I think it's in detriment. But Venus is in a egoic sign, and Mars is in a peace-loving sign, and they're in opposition to each other. So we can see some confusion here about relations with the opposite sex right off the bat. But both of them form an out of sign T-square to his Neptune in Sagittarius, in late Sag. Now, it's easy to see how Venus square Neptune traditionally often translates into fantasy, people who would rather believe in a fantasy than understand the real facts of a story. This can talk to us a little bit about Gates's defense of Donald Trump out of loyalty, Scorpio moon loyalty, which has an expanded quality because it's potentially conjunct Jupiter. As we know, he liked to scream from the rooftops how much former President Trump is correct in his lies about so many things. So this is a person who prefers to put on the rose-colored glasses, to see the best in people, to not accept reality about them. Meanwhile, Mars square Neptune is particularly prevalent in the energy of people who are prone to sexual fantasy. So we have the inclination towards fantasy, just to begin with Venus square Neptune, and the inclination towards sexual fantasy in particular with Mars square Neptune, and they form, like I said, a T-square. So what have we got? We've got and remember, Scorpio is also money, right? So what have we got? We've got a guy who is being accused, and again, he hasn't been tried and convicted yet, so I'm not saying he's guilty. However, he's being accused of trading sexual favors with or for women by paying them or buying them expensive things. And again, we go back to the fact that he's a person who needs to prove his own sense of value on the physical sexual plane by engaging in a lot of sexual activities, but who's also been accused of using the drug ecstasy and buying it for the women with whom he has sexual relations. The part about being accused of luring or engaging in having sexual relationships with someone young, under the age of 18, which is illegal in certain states, and crossing state lines, I think could be attributed to the fact that he's of the Pluto and Libra generation. So before anyone else who's listening to this who has Pluto and Libra starts running around screaming that I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm not talking about you. However, I'm looking at it in the context of this person's particular chart. But in general, Pluto in Libra, and anytime you see Pluto and Venus or Taurus and Scorpio in aspect to each other, particularly frictionally, even if it's signs of other planets, signs that those planets are transiting through at the time of birth, and they're in frictional aspect to each other, because Taurus and Scorpio obviously oppose each other, just like in Matt Gaetz's chart. You have the potential for what I call the iron fist in the velvet glove behavior. That means the person can either exhibit that behavior or they can draw people to them who exhibit that behavior. And the example of that is the guy, the pervert who pulls up in the car in front of the elementary school or the junior high school, rolls down the window and says to the little girl, "Hey, honey, what are you doing? Come here, come closer. Oh, look at those beautiful golden curls you have. You know what I've got for you? I've got a lollipop. Would you like to come in the car and sit next to me? Hey, I have an idea. How about we go for some ice cream?" And before you know it, bad things happen, okay? This is compounded a little bit by the fact that in Matt Gaetz's chart, Saturn is in Libra too, and technically conjunct. It's about 8 degrees apart. I call that a conjunction. And Saturn squares the nodal axis. So we have a guy, given all the other descriptors that I have gone into, who is either prone to drawing these kinds of people to him or acting like one of these people. And what's interesting here is that his south node, we don't know again the house, the south node is in Capricorn. What's the ruler of Capricorn? Saturn. Where is Saturn? Square the nodal axis. So he has a 16 degree, 28 minute Capricorn south node, which means he has a 16, 28 minute Cancer north node, both squared by Saturn at 1651 of Libra. Okay, again, cardinal energy, right? So what have we got here? We've got a guy who, well, the other thing is that Juno, the asteroid Juno, conjoins his south node by about 6 or 7 degrees. It's at 948 of Capricorn. So he came into this lifetime with a very solid sense of responsibility and commitment. If nobody else is going to do it, I guess I have to be the one. That's a kind of attitude. And particularly to partners, right? What we know also is that the moon, roughly between 6 and 18 of Scorpio, depending on the exact time of his birth, sextiles, or is sextiled by the Juno, and sextiles the south node and trines the north node. So because the moon is in Scorpio, and perhaps because it's conjunct Jupiter, we have a person who has exhibited extreme loyalty and commitment to those with whom he partners. On a political level, aka former President Donald Trump. Okay, so his behavior, I think, bears that out. However, karmically, what's tripped him up or vexed him, as they like to say, as Stephen Forrest, my mentor, likes to say, is the Saturn. So as his soul in previous lifetimes was moving away from being overly responsible and committed through a sense of loyalty, particularly related to money. Remember, if Matt Gaetz tied his political fortunes to Donald Trump, he theoretically also could tie his financial fortunes to him. So Donald Trump's success became very important to him on both levels, political and financial, because it's hard to be in politics without having a good, solid financial backing, right? So as he was making his way, his soul was making its way from moving away from being so responsible and committed and loyal to whomever he partnered with in past life karma. He's to develop a sense of nurturing, to find security through the Cancer archetype, which is to not be afraid to nurture himself. Well, again, now it's good news for him that his sun trines the North Node and sextiles the South Node. However, it also quincunxes his Saturn, right? So, every chart has its positives and its negatives. However, the North Node, the sextile by the Sun gives him a leg up, should he choose to acknowledge it, that if he feels undesirable, particularly on a sexual level, that he needs to develop self-compassion and self-nurturing techniques for himself. All right? Whether he is going to get there or not, I have no idea. Your guess is as good as mine. But meanwhile, what he's done is to get off that pathway, which his chart shows he has done in past life karma, and stick to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, where instead of acknowledging his own flaws, his own shadow sides, his own potentially uber sexual nature, combined with a less than desirable physical demeanor, right? That he'll stick to buying people's love, buying people's loyalty, all right, and buying his political position. So I just wanted to point all of this out because I think it's truly fascinating. It's also a great way to show you how you can look at a chart without really knowing the birth time of the person. The other thing is he has an exact quincunx from Venus, values, what I desire in relationship, and because it's in Aries, to Jupiter in Scorpio, which is expansion of, my fortune, my sexuality. In another context, it's expansion of one's psychic capability and one's ability to grow in consciousness. So I wouldn't say it's not there for him. However, whether he's going to achieve it or not, again, as I said, is really up to him. So we'll watch how this plays out. But I think some of his own vices, I think the key here is that he's driven by his own sense of insecurity and lack of self-value and self-worth as it relates to his physical body, and his uber need, potentially, for the engaging in the sexual act, and that the only way he thinks he can get there is by buying people. And I would assume that extends into his politics as well, which maybe remains to be seen. So I want to thank you all so much for joining me today. And I want to say that I hope you found the information presented here helpful. If anyone has any questions about this chart interpretation, I do invite you to email me with any questions or clarifications, or even a copy of the chart, and I'd be happy to further elaborate. But for now, I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week on April 22nd for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. And till then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go.